Have you ever felt deeply connected to someone, and yet the moment things got too close, you pulled away? Now imagine two people doing that to each other at the same time. That's not just a relationship. That's emotional warfare in slow motion. We're talking today about something most people never understand, but so many live through in silence. When two avoidantly attached people enter a relationship, it's not just complicated. It's a dance of fear, distance, longing, and unspoken pain. But here's the thing. Awareness is the first weapon against emotional sabotage. Let's unpack this dynamic together. I promise by the end of this, you won't see relationships the same way again. Avoidantly attached individuals often wear independence like a badge of honor. They'll say things like, I don't need anyone, or I'm just better on my own. And on the surface, it sounds strong, confident even. But when you peel back the layers, when you really look beneath that surface, you find something very different hiding in the shadows. Fear. Not just any fear, the fear of being seen, of being known, of being vulnerable. Now take two people like that, two people who have mastered the art of self-protection, and put them in a relationship. What you end up with isn't strength. It's a silent standoff, cold war of emotion. Two people standing on opposite sides of a wall they each built, peeking through tiny cracks, terrified to knock it down. They don't realize they're both starving emotionally, but too scared to admit it. They'll call it space. They'll call it not being needy. But let's tell the truth. It's not space, it's distance. It's not strength, it's avoidance. They pretend they're fine without deep emotional connection, but inside there's a longing that never dies. It's like a hunger that never gets fed. They crave intimacy, but only when it's safe. And real intimacy? It's never safe. It demands exposure. It demands that you come out from hiding. But when both partners are experts at hiding, the relationship becomes more of a performance than a partnership. They play roles. They show the parts of themselves that feel acceptable and keep the rest locked away. You know what's really tragic? They'll feel proud of their low drama, their chill connection, not realizing that they're not calm. They're just emotionally shut down. There's no depth, no fire, no passion, because both partners are too afraid of what might happen if they let themselves need the other person. And here's the paradox. They're so afraid of being consumed by the relationship, they end up starving in it. So they live behind emotional glass, close enough to see each other, but never close enough to touch. And when things get rocky, they don't talk it through. They retreat further into themselves, reinforcing the idea that they're better off alone. Not because they don't care, but because they've convinced themselves that caring is dangerous. So the illusion continues. Two people who think they're independent, when in reality, they're just afraid. When two avoidantly attached individuals enter a relationship, something subtle but incredibly destructive begins to unfold. The push-pull dynamic that many are familiar with becomes amplified. Usually in this kind of emotional dance, one person leans in while the other pulls away. But when both people are wired to retreat the moment vulnerability appears, the dynamic doesn't just play out, it collides. You're no longer watching a slow unraveling of connection. You're witnessing two people who, at the very same time, are both reaching and retreating, longing and withdrawing, loving and fearing. This leads to a situation where every moment of emotional closeness is met with a recoil. A tender moment, one partner disappears emotionally, sometimes even physically. A vulnerable conversation, the other suddenly shuts down or changes the subject. They might even use sarcasm or humor to deflect. Each attempt at intimacy is followed by distance. And the painful part is neither of them is doing it to hurt the other. They're doing it to protect themselves. But in the process, they unintentionally hurt each other, again and again. You might see this dynamic in the way they text. Lots of deep emotional conversations late at night, when the stakes are low and the vulnerability can be controlled. But when the sun rises and the reality of closeness hits, replies slow down. One of them feels overwhelmed. The other pretends they didn't notice. Neither says anything, but both feel the shift. There's a quiet anxiety, a tension that hangs in the air, and neither one is brave enough to name it. So they just go quiet, and the silence becomes louder than words ever could. This constant back and forth creates emotional confusion. One minute they feel deeply connected, like maybe, just maybe, this could work. The next minute they're questioning everything. Did I say too much? Am I coming on too strong? Maybe I should give them space. And both people are asking themselves the same questions, but not expressing them. It becomes a mental chess game where no one wins. Only silence, suspicion, and self-protection survive. And what's worse is how normal it starts to feel. The inconsistency becomes the pattern. The emotional distance becomes familiar. They mistake unpredictability for passion. They confuse detachment for peace. And because neither person takes the risk of breaking the cycle, the relationship begins to feel more like a series of emotional negotiations than a true connection. They orbit each other, always close, never landing, always hoping the other will make the move, always too scared to go first. When two avoidantly attached individuals find themselves in a romantic relationship, something deeply frustrating begins to unfold beneath the surface. Neither of them wants to be dependent. In fact, the very idea of relying on someone else, emotionally, mentally, or physically, can feel suffocating. To them, dependence is a threat, a sign of weakness, or worse, a setup for eventual abandonment or disappointment. But what they don't realize is that their fear of dependence doesn't free them. It traps them in a prison of emotional isolation. They avoid asking for help, avoid expressing their true needs, and definitely avoid admitting when they're hurt or scared. Even when they're struggling inside, they pretend everything is fine, because to them, vulnerability is a risk that feels too costly. But this habit of emotional self-containment, when mirrored by their partner, creates a dangerous dynamic, a relationship where nobody leans in, nobody reaches out, and nobody truly connects. It's like living in parallel universes, two people sharing the same space, but never really touching emotionally. They become experts at maintaining just enough closeness to keep the relationship going, but never enough to feel truly known or emotionally held. This results in a kind of low-level loneliness that builds quietly over time. There are no major fights, no dramatic breakdowns, just the silent, invisible erosion of intimacy. It's a slow fade, not a sudden fall. What's truly heartbreaking is that both people often convince themselves that this is normal. They interpret the absence of drama as a sign of peace, but deep down, they know something is missing. They miss being emotionally seen and understood, yet they fear what it might cost to reach for that. So instead of facing that fear, they retreat further into their own emotional caves, hoping their partner will somehow magically understand them, without ever having to say a word. There's also a strange kind of pride that sets in. They convince themselves that they're strong because they don't need anything. They associate needing someone with weakness, dependency, or loss of control. But the irony is they do need connection, love, validation, and safety, just like anyone else. They're just afraid to admit it. And in that fear, they begin to starve the relationship. Not because they don't care, but because they're too scared to care openly. So the love remains unspoken, the needs go unmet, and the bond becomes emotionally malnourished. They're still together, but disconnected, still sharing moments, but not meaning, still present, but not fully alive in the relationship. It's not a love story. It's an emotional stalemate. When two avoidant partners come together without self-awareness or the intention to grow, what begins as an emotionally quiet relationship often turns into a stagnant one. On the outside, everything may appear calm, no explosive fights, no visible drama, but on the inside, the relationship is starving for depth. Without emotional confrontation, without vulnerability, and without honesty about each person's internal experience, real intimacy can't breathe. It suffocates slowly under the weight of unspoken thoughts and suppressed feelings. The relationship becomes predictable, routine-driven, and emotionally surface level. Neither partner wants to risk rocking the boat. They avoid difficult conversations, not because they're immune to emotional pain, but because they fear it will expose parts of themselves they've spent years protecting. As a result, both individuals operate with emotional blinders. They go through the motions, sharing dinner, making plans, texting occasionally, but rarely checking in at the level that actually matters. Questions like, "How are you really feeling about us?" or "Do you feel emotionally fulfilled?" are considered too threatening, too revealing. So they're avoided entirely. And here's where the real damage is done. Emotional growth, both individually and within the relationship, gets stunted. Without conscious reflection, these individuals stay trapped in their old patterns. They keep choosing distance over discomfort, withdrawal over openness, and silence over truth. That's not love, it's emotional self-preservation dressed up as compatibility. They don't challenge each other to grow. They don't serve as mirrors for one another's healing, and because both are stuck in the same mindset, believing that intimacy is risky, closeness is dangerous, and vulnerability is unsafe, there's no one to break the pattern. No one is leading the way out of emotional avoidance. Because both are walking in circles around their fears. They might even tell themselves, "This is just how I am," or "This is what works for me." But what they don't realize is that what feels familiar isn't always what's healthy. Just because emotional distance feels safe doesn't mean it's serving them. In fact, it's keeping them locked in outdated versions of themselves, versions built around protection, not connection. This isn't just about two people avoiding each other. It's about two people avoiding themselves, avoiding the inner work, the uncomfortable truths, and the possibility of becoming someone more open, more courageous, more capable of real, lasting love. The relationship may survive on the surface, but underneath it's frozen in place, unmoving, and emotionally underdeveloped. And if neither person decides to change, nothing ever evolves. When two avoidants are caught in a relationship cycle of emotional distance, silence, and mutual retreat, it can feel like nothing will ever change. But everything begins to shift when just one person makes the decision to lead with courage instead of fear. Healing doesn't require both partners to be fully healed from the start. It requires one person to make the first brave move. That single shift can ripple through the entire relationship. Avoidants aren't heartless. They're not incapable of love. In fact, they often feel love deeply, but their instinct is to hide it, control it, or run from it. They fear that showing too much, asking for too much, or needing too much will drive the other person away. So they suppress. But when one partner chooses to step outside of that protective shell and speak openly about their fears, their desires, their emotional needs, it challenges the dynamic completely. It sends a message. It's safe to be real here. That authenticity is powerful. It doesn't just open a door. It lights a path. The other partner, who may also be craving connection but terrified to initiate it, suddenly sees a different way of relating. And when they don't feel judged, blamed, or forced, they often begin to soften. Emotional safety, when modeled consistently, has a disarming effect. It says you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be present. This doesn't mean the relationship transforms overnight. The avoidant patterns will try to pull them both back into old habits. Pulling away after conflict, downplaying emotions, resisting deep conversations. But when one partner remains steady, grounded, and open through those moments, the relationship begins to rewire itself. The safety isn't just talked about, it's proven, over and over again. Being the one to lead with emotional bravery isn't easy. It can feel unfair. It can feel one-sided at first. But the truth is, the most emotionally transformative relationships are rarely 50/50 at every moment. Sometimes they're 90/10 sometimes. One person is carrying the emotional leadership because they've done more inner work or because they've reached a point where they're no longer willing to live behind walls. And this isn't about being the strong one. It's about being the free one. Free from the fear that intimacy will destroy you. Free from the belief that needing someone makes you weak. And when one partner embraces that freedom and shows up with honesty, tenderness, and a willingness to connect despite the discomfort, the other begins to trust in a way they never have before. That's when healing becomes contagious. When two avoidants find themselves in a relationship, it often starts with intrigue, even chemistry. But what follows is a complex web of emotional distance, silent longing, and misunderstood intention. On the surface, things may seem calm and collected, even peaceful, but underneath, both individuals are navigating a storm of fears. Fears of being seen, of being needed, of being hurt. They crave love, yet are terrified of the vulnerability it demands. And because neither partner feels safe enough to lower their guard first, they stay trapped in a cycle of withdrawal and disconnect, each waiting for the other to reach out, to soften, to heal what they themselves are afraid to touch. It's a painful paradox. Two people who desperately want connection but are too conditioned to run from it the moment it arrives. So they live in emotional limbo, dancing on the edges of intimacy, never quite falling in. They don't fight because they don't go deep enough to confront. They don't break down because they've trained themselves not to feel too much. And so the relationship exists in a kind of emotional fog. Present but not fully alive. Comfortable but never truly safe. It's the kind of relationship that slowly drains you, not because of what's happening, but because of what's not happening. The raw, real, vulnerable connection that love truly requires. But there is a way out. And it doesn't require both partners to be fully healed or emotionally fluent from the start. It begins with just one person choosing to break the pattern, one person deciding to feel the fear and stay open anyway. When someone dares to show up with truth, softness, and emotional responsibility, it changes the tone of the entire relationship. It creates space. It disarms the defense mechanisms. It sends the most powerful message of all. You don't have to run. You are safe here. And slowly the other partner, often for the first time, feels like maybe they can breathe. Maybe they don't have to hide. Maybe love doesn't have to hurt. This is not easy work. It takes patience. It takes awareness. It takes letting go of the armor we've carried for years. But when two people, even if imperfectly, begin choosing courage over avoidance, something beautiful happens. The walls begin to crumble. The masks fall off. And in that space of truth, a real relationship begins. Not one built on fear or performance, but one rooted in authenticity, trust, and mutual healing. That's the kind of love that doesn't just survive, it transforms you. And it all begins when someone decides that hiding is no longer an option. That love, in its fullest and most vulnerable form, is worth the risk. If this message touched something deep inside you, if it made you reflect, feel seen, or understand yourself or your relationship just a little more, then this space has already done its job. These conversations aren't always easy, but they are necessary. Growth begins the moment we stop running and start facing what's true within us. If you found value in today's video, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear this too. And of course, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep and powerful conversation like this. Your journey matters. Your healing matters. And remember, just because you've been avoidant doesn't mean you're incapable of deep, soul-level love. It's never too late to unlearn the walls and choose connection instead.